Hi there, thanks for joining. Today I want to show you a great tool for us traditional artists, the eyedropper or color picker tool. And well, it's gonna be a great video, I hope, without even touching paint. How is that possible? So let's take a look. In short, with the eyedropper tool you can pick a color on the screen and then the computer tells you exactly what kind of color it is. So the eyedropper or color picker tool usually has an icon like this. That makes sense, it looks like an eyedropper tool. And then of course it depends on which kind of software you use, what kind of information you get, how it is presented to you. In Photoshop it's different than in Krita, but all in all the concept is the same. Here you see a photograph. I've opened that photo in Krita. And the eyedropper tool is over here, as you can see. So I can select it and I can click on the spot on the screen, and then you already see that square. It tells me what kind of color that is that I click. See, now it's blue, here it's green. Now the fun thing is I can also open this screen in Krita, the color wheel, and if I pick a color now, then you can see that on this outer line here, this color wheel, just the color wheel as we know it with all the main colors on it, and that we've talked about previously in other videos already. There is your yellow, green, blue, etc, etc. But you see, if I go over the screen with the color pickers, you see that line jumping around like crazy on the edge of that color wheel. All the time it shows the exact color family that the color belongs to, the main color. Now then, the first thing I want to talk about is the color bias before we dive into all the other aspects that we see. But the video about color bias, I will link that in the description as well, is a very important one, because every color on the color wheel can have a bias towards another color, the neighbor color. So yellow here on the color wheel, and I'll grab the most saturated version. This is a rather neutral yellow over here, but when I go to the left it gets more orange, and when I go to the right it gets more green. So then we say this yellow can be neutral, or it can have a bias towards green, or it can have a bias towards orange. Same if I have a here I have an orange, but that orange can be more biased towards yellow, but it can also be biased more towards red. You see? Now, and that you can do that with every color. Here you have a rather neutral blue, but if I go this way, the blue gets more green, and if I go the other way, the blue gets more purple. So that's the color bias. And the fun thing is, when I click the sky, look, there you go, I can see the color bias straight away. So now you see that it's over here. This indicates it's a rather neutral blue, so to speak, because it isn't much to the purple side and it isn't much to the green side. Okay, now let's go to this photograph. You see, this was a rather neutral gray from the previous photograph. Now I click on the sea, here, the water. You see what happens to the main color? The bias shifts more towards green. So that tells me that this water is, I interpret it as blue, but it is a blue with a green bias, a slight green bias. So that can be useful. And the same thing we can do for the green in the water. I think we agree that the water that you here see over here is kind of green. I click on this part, you see? And then we can check, is this a green that is more towards yellow, or is it more towards blue? And now I've clicked that spot, and then I see that the bias of the green, this is the main color. It doesn't say that it is this saturated, but the main color here is green. But you see that it has rather a big bias towards blue. So, fun. So that's already a thing. If you struggle a little bit with color bias, and color bias is already an important thing when you start color mixing. If you don't see that a yellow is more towards orange or more towards green, then it already gets difficult to get to the right color. So, and I personally used to struggle a lot for a long time with blue. I found it always rather difficult to judge if a blue was neutral or more purple or more green. And I think that's maybe because I always learned as a kid, at school, etc., that a purplish kind of blue was primary blue. Huh? So that makes, of course, that has led to a long time of confusion. When you see this kind of blue as a neutral blue, well, the blue that I indicate here on the screen now, then you have a problem, so to speak. So I struggled a long time with judging blue colors. And so at a certain moment I decided, hey, why not use Photoshop to check what kind of bias the blue has. And then I just started grabbing all kinds of photos and started training my observation. And so, it took a while, I must say, but after a while my image of neutral blue got a little bit reset, and it got easier for me now to judge if a color is more towards, the blue color is more towards purple or more towards green, or that it's maybe rather neutral. So, just to say, it's a great tool to study color bias, to train yourself. So just let's take a completely other example, but this yellow in the background, for instance, we all agree, I think, that it is a version of yellow. But then I start thinking, yeah, is it a neutral yellow, is it an orangey yellow, or is it more towards green? So I first estimate myself. I think it's a rather warm yellow. Well, it is light and it is desaturated, but it's more towards the warm side, I guess. So I check, I choose the eyedropper tool, I click, and there you have it. You see, it's a yellow that's slightly more towards the orange side. It's ever so slightly, but you see, if I go like this is more a kind of neutral yellow, if I make it very saturated. We were about here, and then it was a lighter version of that yellow, and but you could have got, but maybe you thought it is more of a green yellow, then it would have been like this, you see? But so that's the way you can use this tool to train yourself. And this is only the beginning. This is color bias. So I love this tool. It's absolutely great. So what are the main important things we look for when we color mix? That's the color family. We have covered that now. First we say, oh, this is yellow. Then we ask ourselves the question, is it a warm or a cool yellow? Or let me say, is it biased towards green or orange? The next question could be the value. How dark or light is this color? So if I look at this photo, if I look at this man's shirt, that pink shirt, then I think it's rather obvious that it is quite light. And I already said it is pink, so it is a light version of red, purple, that kind of stuff. So let's click on it with the color picker. You see, we get a very light version of a red that has a little bit, has a bias towards purple, so that's one thing. Then we see here clearly on the color wheel, this triangle, we see that it has a light value. Let me show you. This is the main color here on the wheel. So, and in its most saturated form, I can find it at this edge of the triangle. So that what you see here on the edge is this color in its most optimal form. Now, and when I slide from here to here, you see that the color gets darker. When I slide from here to here, you see that the color gets lighter. So that indicates a little bit the tonal values. And if I slide to this side, you see that the color gets less saturated. Here it is totally gray. Here it is totally white, and here it's totally black. But for now, let's say it is very light, so it of course lies in this region, because here are the light versions of this specific color. I can do the same for every color. The yellow color in the background here, you see that this on the edge of the wheel is this kind of main color in its most saturated form. But we saw, where does it lie? It lies a little bit here. So it goes from this to this. Somewhere here. See, yeah, here. So it is a lighter version of this. Well, I've got a touristic image here of the Netherlands. When I want to know the color of the sky, and now I want to know the value of the sky as well. I want to check if I know what the value of that sky is. Aha, there we are. This color does something like this. It goes over here, so it gets lighter, but it also gets desaturated a little bit. And I'll come to that in the next step. But you see, you can easily see how light or dark the color is. Let's get a dark color here, for instance, this in the water here. And what you see then is that you get a brownish green kind of color, you see, over here. So that's fascinating, isn't it? So, and we see it now as well as we look on the water. Here, this might be a little bit more brown, so then you already see this is more greenish brown, then it has more to do with yellow. But look, if I go downwards, this looks a little bit more orangey kind of brown. So and you see that is true because the yellow shifts a little bit more towards the orange side. You see? And it is dark and desaturated, so then you get in that color range. So that's the values you can easily see instantly. And over here, this is rather light, it's not that dark. So here another typical Dutch picture, so to speak. Here the bottom of the shelf is rather dark, so I click on it. What happens? Yes, we instantly see it's a very dark value of a rather orangey color. So most optimal form of this color is this. You see, it's very orange. And it was about over here, I thought. So a very dark color and also very desaturated. So that's the next step that we're going to look at. Now the fun thing is, for instance, with very difficult photos like this. Because here you have all kinds of colors that it's very hard to guess, of course. And we can see the sky is a brown orangey kind of stuff. And we can check. That's about right, you see, orange and then desaturated and a little bit gray, so a little bit gray. But these trees, for instance, what kind of color is that? Now, we might interpret it as slightly green, because we know it has to be green, leaves. But is it that green? Let's take a look. No, it has nothing to do with green, you see, it is still orange. And it is a gray kind of orangey color. So, and that's the thing with colors next to each other, influence each other so greatly that our minds get tricked in all kinds of ways. So, but again, we instantly see that this is a rather dark value, and if I go over here, you instantly see that's a rather light tonal value. So, and now let's look at saturation. Here I have another cliche from the Netherlands. Tulips. And these tulips here in front, how saturated are they? You can instantly see that this purple kind of tulip, of course, is more saturated than this one. And we can see, if we click on it, you see here, this is the main color. And it still contains, it is in this range of color, it still contains a lot of color. You can instantly see that. But if you click on this one, for instance, and you see, if I go over it like this one, of course, there you are more in the gray region of the color. You see? So that's the way to look at saturation. If I click on a building in the background, you see, the base color of this is red-orange, but it is all the way over here, so this is the most optimal vivid form, and the more you go here this way, the grayer it gets, the more gray it gets. Now we already know how you can make colors more gray, and you can add black and white, you can add the complementary color, so in this case orange. What is opposite of this color? It would be something like cyan. So that can dull the color down, that you get more gray. But that's already mentioned in other videos. But you see, that's fun. This tarmac, for instance, what kind? It is gray, it is very gray. But what kind of gray? Is that a cool gray or a warm gray? So let's click on it. Aha! It's a rather warm gray because see where on the color wheel it gets indicated? In the yellow orangey side. You see? So that tells us something. If I want to mix this kind of road, I can use a neutral gray, of course, but then I can add a little bit of yellow, orange, that kind of stuff. This field over here, what kind of color is that? It's difficult to see because it is a very desaturated grayish kind of color. So let's click on it. Aha! It is a light version of a yellowy orange, and it is very desaturated, as we can see, because this is the base color and we were over here about like this. It's also rather light, of course, that's the tonal value, but the saturation is very low. And also the grass. And this is, if I click on the grass here for instance, then you can also see that it is also rather desaturated. And I've already talked about this a lot in the video, muted colors are more natural. When we would paint this, we would be tempted to get a green like this out of the tube on our palette. Maybe something like this. We think, green grass, blum, green. But you see when I click on it, how rather desaturated that color actually is, because this is the main color where it derives from, and it is about somewhere about here, I'm not sure anymore, but you see that's way more gray than this. And the fun thing with all these gray kind of colors combined still give you a colorful image. It isn't that we say, oh, this contains no color, but a combination of a lot of gray kind of colors gives a colorful picture as well. The sky. The sky is rather, you could say, isn't that desaturated. Because when I take this as a reference, then you see that this is the main color. Well, it is a little bit lighter, so that also desaturates. So it is desaturated, but not as much as the gray of the tarmac, for instance, of the grass. You see? Now here, for instance, I have a photograph. This I have taken in the early hours of the morning, and and that's funny, when you have a cloudy day or when it just has rained and stuff like that, then sometimes you encounter very vivid colors. So the green here on the photo is, I see it as very saturated. But it can be a pitfall because the surrounding colors maybe are rather gray. So when a lot of colors are very gray and you suddenly have a slightly less gray color, then it can be that it still is very desaturated. But let's check it. So that's the fun thing with this eyedropper tool. I just dropped the eyedropper tool here and you see it is very saturated kind of green. You can see it there clearly in the triangle. You see? It is all a bit in this region. So it is rather a saturated color. And the tarmac in this case is a little bit of a red, purplish, kind of very gray, desaturated color. So, and the white of the house is also always a funny thing. The white here in this house, or even over there. Is that really white? Let's check. Puff. Aha! It's a very light version, but even a kind of gray version, you see, of blue, of this blue. Now, would you have guessed that? That's fun, isn't it? So if you want to make that house, you can make it very, very grayish with a little touch of blue. And so it is not, and we can also clearly see that when I just take pure white and I add that next to it, like this, then you clearly see the difference. So that's fun, isn't it? Here I have a great picture with a pitfall at the dark side of the spectrum, to say it like that. This area here, you see, it's a nice picture. You see reflected light here in the shadow. So it gets nice kind of blue color, and it seems light to us. At least that's what I think. It's when we are painting these dark shadows, shadow parts, you can see it's very dark. You see on the triangle how dark it is? And then we get to that lighter part, and then we are tempted to make it way too light. That's that pitfall that I already talked about so often. So what happens if I click on that, and you see on the triangle, I'll get the triangle a little bit over here, you see how dark that color still is. Here's another fun picture to look at. Let's look at the nostrils. The nostrils, oh, dark, let's paint them black. Okay, but let's check. Aha, they aren't black. You see what happens? It's a kind of a brown. It's a very dark version of the orangey, red, orange kind of color. No, it's orange. And then a very dark, so you get a brown color. So when you paint, it looks more natural. When you paint that in a dark brown color, then you would put a black line on it. And that's again, then we get to the discussion of can you use black or not. Often black is prohibited to use by teachers because of this kind of reasons. A lot of colors aren't black. But that's not to say that you never can use black. I'm against prohibiting the use of black. But here it isn't necessary to use black, for instance. But the other nice pitfall for this painting, we've done the nostril. Now let's head over to the whites of the eye. And I already say the whites of the eye. So we think, oh, the eyes are white, the white of the eye. But when we, and of course they are, but when I click on it, we see that they are actually quite gray. That's the way it is presents itself to us due to the lighting conditions and stuff like that. So, and dark shadow. So here you clearly see that this is A, it contains a little bit of color, and B, it is rather dark. Here this one might be even darker, you see? So that's a rather dark color. But people always ask, how do I make these soft transitions in the clouds and the background and stuff like that? Then that is always a matter of contrast, the tonal values. If you have a low contrast, you get a smoother, softer image. So here you see that if I look with the color picker, this isn't that much darker than this. You see? So when you stick to that when you paint, you get a soft transition easily. And the same goes for the clouds itself. This is slightly lighter than this. But that way, when you keep the colors and the values close, you see that that hardly makes any difference. And so when you do that in your painting as well, then you get that soft feel to it. This is Photoshop, it shows everything a little bit different. But when I click on the grass here, or let's say here on the fur of the lion, then you see that it is a brown kind of color. But you see the idea is the same. You see that this is sort of the color wheel, but then it's stretched out in one line. And then you see it's an orangey color, and it is a brown version of that, so it is desaturated and it is a little bit, you can also see how light and dark it is. So it's the same story, it looks a bit different. So these are your main colors. This is, if this is your main color, this ugly green, if I may say so. And then you go lighter, you can go lighter to white even, you can go darker to black. And you can go this way, but you can also go to the desaturated greens. Oh yeah, and what you also see is, so for instance, here you have some codes. This one is one that you might encounter in things like, this is the hex code. You encounter that in all kinds of programs like Word and Excel, that kind of stuff. And this code actually is the real computer code for this specific exact color. And you see a lot of other kind of codes here, and most I'm not that familiar with, but RGB, that is for screens. So here you see the values of red, green and blue for the screen. But another thing that is slightly more of use for us is the cyan, magenta, yellow and K, black. And then it's funny that you see, because we see that this is a kind of an orange color. So when we think about orange, it must contain a little bit of magenta and a little bit of yellow. And to desaturate orange, we also need a little bit of cyan. Let's look if we see that covered here. Yeah, so the amount of yellow is 47%, magenta 25%. So yellow and magenta make for that orangey kind of color. And then also there's a little bit of cyan to dull the color down. And even also a little bit of black. But you can forget that, of course, because that is printer information, in fact. And now the last picture, and then I stop wasting your time. But this is really nice, I think, this tool, this eyedropper tool. I really like it. It's just fun to practice this outside. You don't even need paint, and you still can train yourself. When I look at this color in the sky, this very yellowish orangey color, and I make a new layer and I put it over here with my brush, and I add a new layer here and I make that gray, just as a kind of a test. See, this color that I've picked out of that sky, if I look at it myself now and I have to judge, then I say it contains it is a yellow orange, so it contains a lot of yellow, it contains a little bit of magenta. And I think it hardly contains any of the third primary of cyan. And why do I think that? Because this color looks very saturated to me. It can be that it contains a little bit of white. That's possible. And a way to mute a color as well is, of course, making it lighter with white a little bit. So that can be the case. So let's check. I click on it again, and now I look at the extra information. Now then we see indeed that it contains 0 magenta, cyan. It contains quite a lot of magenta, and it contains a whole lot of yellow. And the lightness, because we can see this is more saturated. If I go to the right, that tells us it contains a little bit more white. The more I go over here, you see. And printers, when they must print light colors, then they use the white of the paper. I don't know that all exactly. I'm not an expert in that. But what I can see is that that when I would mix this color myself, I would say I use yellow and magenta, but no cyan in this case, because it looks rather undisturbed. And it looks a little bit as a light, it has a little bit of softness. So then indeed I would use a little bit of white. So that printer information you can forget about a little bit, but it is a slight indication of, hey, in which way do I search the color. There are a lot of different kinds of software that have color picker or eyedropper tools, and it's mostly known from photo editing software and programs, drawing and painting programs and stuff like that. A lot of programs have this feature, and there are also a lot of apps for the phone or the tablet that can even show colors, the color information in real time. So then you use the camera of the phone to point at the subject, and then you can see the color information in real time on the display. And the problem only is, I make this video now and we all know that apps and software change all the time. And sometimes apps are free, sometimes apps are you have to pay for them and that kind of stuff. So I ask my community, the viewers, if you by chance have a great app that is free or that you can recommend, please tell that in the comments so we can help out others. So that would be great. Now, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.